Alrighty, welcome back, boys and girls. It's your main math man, Mr. Shank, coming to you live from Mayfield. And as always, make sure that you're seeing where we are at in this wonderful video. So we're going to be talking about domain and range here shortly, but we want to make sure we can recap from last time. So again, when we're talking about relations versus functions, again, we're talking about relations being any set of ordered pairs. And so it's just any set of ordered pairs where those ordered pairs are those x and y values. And more specifically, when you have a function, again, those are relations, but more specifically when they have no repeated x values. So again, functions are a set of ordered pairs that have no repeated x values. So now, still working on that coordinate plane, we're going to be talking about domain and range. And so for domain, we define it as the set of x values of a relation. And again, it's written in that set notation, where you are using brackets and commas in between each value. And so, for example, it might look something like this. So you could have that D stands for the domain, and then you put a colon to just break it apart, and then you have your brackets to show the set of values. And so I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So again, those are 4 values that are in there. So now what would that look like? Well, I have a set of ordered pairs here, just like before, using those ordered pairs from my relation versus function notes, but now I want to see, well, I'm looking for those x values. So you want to make sure you're looking for those x values. So I'm going to say, well, I have the first value in an ordered pair is that x value, and so it's going to be these numbers. And so when we go to write our domain, again, we would write it like this. We would say D and then colon. Well, I need to have it in order from least to greatest. So I'd say 2, 3, and 4. And some of you might say, well, where is the other 3 at? And very simply, we know that any repeated values are only written once. Again, we're just saying what values are the x values, 2, 3, and 4. Another formula you can have for this is that graph. So looking at this graph, you want to find those points that are ordered pairs and then use the correct axis to determine your values. So now that we're still talking about domain, we're looking at this x-axis, and so I want to make sure that those values are all lined up. I can kind of highlight and show, all right, well, I have those are going to be my x values, and so what are those points that go along with it? Maybe I can even draw a vertical line from those points. I can say, well, I have a point on 2. Let me actually do a green. I have a point on 2. I have 2 points on 3, actually. And I have a point on 4. So I know that my values for the domain in this graph are going to be 2, 3, and 4. So again, I write it D colon, and then I have the brackets to show the set notation. Be very careful when you're working on that graph, as a lot of people mess up that x and y axis. So again, if you're talking about domain, you're talking about that horizontal axis. So another form that you can have of that is those tables. And so again, always making sure, since we're talking about domain, we're talking about those x values. And so now what I can do is this, depending on how it looks, maybe I want it to look for the row or column. Well, since this is in displayed vertically, I'd say that this is going to be my x values here. So it's going to just be that column of x values. Similar setup, however, now I have the horizontally displayed table, and so I'd say this is going to be my row of x values, and so it's just these values for the domain. Just like before, you don't need to write any repeated values, you just list those values that are in the domain. So our domain still is going to be D colon, and then I have those brackets 2, 3, and 4. So now what is that key idea? As always, that domain of a relation is the set of x values. So always have that domain is your x values, and you'll be good. So now what does that mean for range? Well, if you can think carefully, that means that we would define the range as the set of, you guessed it, the y values. And so it is written still using those brackets and commas in between each value. And so, for example, what letter do you think we would use for range? You guessed it, it is R. So we're going to use R and then colon. And for an example, again, you can always have negative or positive numbers. They're just going to be integers. And so we have -3, -2, -1, and 0. So another idea of what range looks like. So again, it's using that set of ordered pairs. It's the graph, it's the table, whatever it looks like, you still know what it means. So we're looking for those y values, and since we're talking about those y values, we're saying it is going to be that second value in an ordered pair. So I'm talking about this value here, 2, 3, and 4. So again, those are our y values. And so we would say our range is going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, I use those commas to separate the values. And just like before, we have that the values are ordered from least to greatest. Again, furthest left is that lower value or that least value. And also too, if there's any, which usually there's not, but if there is any repeated values, again, they're still written once, just like in domain. So now for a graph, same kind of setup, find that points on the graph, be able to use that correct axis. And so now we're talking about the range. So we want to now be using that y or that vertical axis. And so let me highlight ahead of time or what I am talking about. So again, I have these values here. Again, this is my y-axis, and I have the values that go along with it. Again, are the ones that are going up and down. That way it looks a little bit easier to follow along. And so now, okay, I can see which points I need. So I can say, well, let's try to draw a horizontal line now from those points. Let me do a green like last time. And so I said, well, I have a 1 right next to it, or I can also just circle the numbers, whatever works best for you. So I could say I have a 1, I have a 2, I have a 3, and I have a 4. Again, those points are coming from these points on the graph. Again, those are the ordered pairs. However, the y values that go along with it is the range. And so we would write our range like this. We would say R is going to be the range, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4. Again, using that table, look for your row or column of y values. So still, just like last time, we have our vertically displayed column of values. And now we can say, well, I know I'm just looking for the range, so it's going to be those y values. Or if it's displayed horizontally, still the same setup, I can say that, hey, I know that these are my y values. It has it labeled as such, and so that means that my range is going to be, again, still 1, 2, 3, and 4. Make sure you have those commas in between, and that way you can label them carefully. Again, that key idea, just as always, range is going to be the y values, the set of y values in a relation. So again, have that as range equals your y values. All right, so that final boss battle music, cue it, and it says this, last example, match the domain range with the graph of the given relation. And so it gives me points in ordered pairs on the coordinate plane, and now it also has a set, or it actually has 6 sets of values, and it's saying, okay, which of these are going to be your domain, and then which of these are going to be your range. So let's break this down a little bit carefully. What we could do, a couple different ways to approach it, depends on what works best for you, but I'll show you a couple. One way of doing it is just like I showed before. I would just find my domain first, and so I'm going to highlight the x-axis, list my values, and then I would highlight my y-axis and list my values as my range, and I'd be done. Another way of doing it is what you could do is you can use the values given and say, well, I know that this one, this first one right here, I know this is not in the domain or the range because, well, if I'm looking at domain, I don't have any points that are -4. And if I'm looking at the range, I don't have any points that are -4, so I could eliminate that one. Again, up to you which one works best for you. I'm going to show you one of the ways, but you always have multiple options. So let's do domain first. So I'm going to be listing my values for x. And so I'm going to say, all right, well, I have my x-axis, again, is the horizontal axis. And so what are the values that go along with it? Well, I have, let's actually circle them. I have a 1. I have a 1. I have a 0, another 1, and a 2. So again, I'm saying, okay, on my x-axis, where are those points at? And so I need to have a domain of those 4 values. And so I'd say my domain is going to be -1, 0, 1, and 2. And so I'd say for this, it's going to be -1, 0, 1, and 2. So now, for my range, I can highlight my y-axis, again, going vertically, and I would say, all right, what values go along with my range? Well, if I look carefully, I'd say, well, going up and down, I want to always start at the lowest one because that is the least. And so I'd say, well, I have a -3 that goes along with it. I have a 0 as well. I have a 3, and I have a 6. And so I'd say my range, my y values for this are going to be as follows. They're going to be, just like we listed off, we would say -3, 0, 3, and 6. And so I'd say that for this one, I would need to choose, let's say, the one that's in the bottom right. So I'd say -3, 0, 3, and 6 would be my range. So again, make sure you're saying, again, the key ideas from this, domain is my x values, range is my y values. As always, super slam that subscribe button.